There is a version of California that most people alive today never got to see. A California where orange groves stretched to the horizon, where a teacher could buy a house with a backyard and a pool, where the freeways were wide open and the air smelled like jasmine and salt water. It sounds like a fantasy now, but for millions of people it was just Tuesday. Before the gridlock, before the million-dollar starter homes, before the fires made international news every single year, there was a California that earned the name Golden, not as a brand, but as a lived reality. And the people who were there will tell you it was everything they say it was, maybe more. This is the story of what California actually looked like before everything changed. Some of this might stir something deep. Some of it might explain why losing that California still stings. Let's step into that world. The California that existed from the late 1950s through the early 1980s was unlike anywhere else on Earth. The post-war boom had turned the state into a magnet. People arrived by the thousands every single week, drawn by defense jobs, aerospace contracts, and the simple promise of warm weather and a fresh start. For a remarkable stretch of time, California delivered on every one of those promises. Housing was the foundation of the California dream. A working-class family could buy a ranch-style home in the San Fernando Valley, in Orange County, in the Inland Empire, on a single income. These homes had big backyards with citrus trees, lemon trees, orange trees, and sometimes avocado trees. Kids picked fruit off the branches and ate it warm from the sun. Swimming pools were not reserved for the wealthy. Subdivisions across Southern California included them as standard features. Neighbors shared fence lines, borrowed cups of sugar, and let their kids run between yards without a second thought. The architecture reflected a way of living that simply does not exist in the same way anymore. Sliding glass doors opened onto patios. Bedrooms had jalousie windows that let the breeze flow through. Homes were modest by today's standards, but they were owned, not rented. Families built equity. They planted gardens. They stayed. Northern California had its own magic. San Francisco was a city of artists, longshoremen, and families who had lived in the same neighborhood for generations. Rent was reasonable. The Mission District was working class. North Beach still carried the spirit of the Beat generation. Across the bay, Berkeley hummed with political energy, while Oakland maintained a blue-collar pride that held communities together. The Central Valley was the breadbasket. Farmland ran unbroken for hundreds of miles. Small towns with main streets and Friday night football games dotted the landscape. Fresno, Bakersfield, Stockton. These were places where people knew their neighbors by name and doors stayed unlocked. The car culture of old California was not the traffic nightmare it became. The freeway system was a marvel of engineering when it was new. Driving the 101 along the coast or cruising down a wide-open Interstate 5 was genuinely enjoyable. Los Angeles had built its identity around the automobile, and in the early decades it worked. People drove big American cars with the windows down. Convertibles were everywhere. A teenager with a part-time job could afford a used Mustang or Impala and spend Friday nights at the drive-in. Cruise nights along Van Nuys Boulevard drew thousands. The whole street became a rolling car show. Lowriders in East Los Angeles turned automotive customization into an art form with candy-painted bodies and hydraulic suspensions that made cars dance. Gas stations had attendants who pumped your gas, checked your oil, and cleaned your windshield. Nobody thought twice about filling up a V8 engine because fuel was cheap and the roads were open. Before we continue exploring the culture and lifestyle of this lost California, if you are enjoying this journey back in time and want to see more stories about how Americans used to live, consider subscribing. There are so many more decades and places to revisit together. The natural beauty of California before heavy development was staggering. The coastline from Big Sur to Malibu was largely undeveloped. Beaches were not crowded. A family could drive up the Pacific Coast Highway and find a stretch of sand with almost nobody on it. Tide pools teemed with sea stars and anemones that kids could explore for hours. The mountains were accessible and uncrowded. Families would drive up to Big Bear or Lake Arrowhead for the weekend without reservations. Yosemite was not yet requiring permits to manage the crowds. Camping meant pulling into a spot, setting up a tent, and being surrounded by wilderness that felt endless. Southern California's landscape was defined by agriculture before suburbs replaced it. Orange County was named for its orange groves, and those groves were real. Miles and miles of orderly trees with white blossoms that perfumed the air every spring. The scent was so strong it would drift into neighborhoods. Walnut groves covered what is now the San Gabriel Valley. Strawberry fields stretched across Oxnard. Vineyards filled the Inland Empire before the housing tracts arrived. Food reflected this abundance. Roadside fruit stands sold avocados, strawberries, and citrus for almost nothing. Fish tacos from stands near the beach were $1. Mexican food was not a trend, it was the everyday cuisine of a state shaped by its proximity to the border and its deep Mexican-American roots. Taco shops on every corner in San Diego. Burrito stands in East LA that families had run for generations. The food was simple, inexpensive, and extraordinary. Seafood was plentiful along the coast. Fishermen worked the waters off Monterey and San Pedro. Dungeness crab season in Northern California was an event. Families gathered to crack crab and eat sourdough bread, a tradition stretching back generations. The education system in California was once the envy of the nation. Public schools were well funded and class sizes were manageable. The University of California system was virtually free for state residents. A student could attend Berkeley or UCLA and graduate without debt. Community colleges provided affordable pathways for anyone who wanted to learn. This access to education was a cornerstone of the California Promise. It did not matter where someone came from. The state would educate them. The entertainment and cultural scene was thriving in ways that shaped the entire country. Hollywood was producing the films that defined American cinema. The music coming out of Los Angeles and San Francisco was the soundtrack of a generation. The Sunset Strip was alive with clubs and neon, and comedy clubs launched careers. Small theaters in San Francisco and Los Angeles nurtured artists who went on to change their fields. Disneyland in Anaheim was the original theme park, and visiting it still felt special. Families saved up for the trip. Walking down Main Street felt like stepping into a perfect small-town America that Walt Disney had imagined. Knott's Berry Farm next door offered a more rustic, Western-themed experience with boysenberry pie that people drove hours to eat. The beach towns each had their own personality. Huntington Beach belonged to the surfers. Laguna Beach was for the artists. Santa Cruz had its boardwalk and its counterculture spirit. Venice Beach was raw and eclectic with bodybuilders, street performers, and fortune tellers. Malibu was glamorous, but not yet gated off from the world. Skateboarding was born in the empty swimming pools of drought-era Southern California. Kids in Santa Monica and Dogtown turned concrete into playgrounds. It was rebellious, creative, and completely Californian. Community life had a texture that is hard to replicate now. Block parties happened regularly. Neighbors borrowed tools and watched each other's kids. Little League games drew entire neighborhoods. Churches and community centers hosted dances and potlucks. The pace of life allowed for connection. People were not yet buried in screens or stretched thin by multiple jobs just to cover rent. California was never perfect, even in its golden years. Smog in Los Angeles was severe. On bad days, the mountains disappeared behind a brown haze and children were told not to play outside. Racial inequality was real and deep. Redlining kept neighborhoods segregated. The Watts Uprising in 1965 revealed frustrations that the California dream had not reached everyone equally. Migrant farm workers in the Central Valley labored in brutal conditions until leaders like Cesar Chavez organized for dignity and fair wages. But even with its flaws, there was something about the trajectory. California felt like it was moving forward. Environmental regulations began cleaning the air. The civil rights movement was pushing for justice. The state was investing in infrastructure, education, and public spaces. The sense was that problems existed but could be solved, that tomorrow would be better than today. What changed is not one single thing, it was gradual. Housing costs began climbing in the 1980s, and they never stopped. The population swelled, while infrastructure struggled to keep pace. Freeways that once flowed freely became parking lots. The cost of living pushed working families further from the cities where they worked. Orange groves became subdivisions. Farmland became strip malls. The open spaces shrank. The California that existed before everything changed was not a myth. It was a real place where real people lived ordinary lives surrounded by extraordinary beauty and genuine opportunity. A place where the middle class could thrive, where the outdoors was a way of life, and where the future still felt wide open. For those who remember that California, the memories carry a particular weight. The smell of orange blossoms on a warm evening, the sound of waves at an uncrowded beach, a house that a family could actually afford. These were not luxuries. They were just life in the Golden State. For those with memories of this remarkable era, there is always more history to explore.